When I first signed the papers for the little house on the lake, I felt like I'd won the lottery of peace and quiet. Nestled in a sleepy lakeside community that promised early morning mist over calm waters and long, lazy afternoons watching the sun set, it seemed like the perfect escape from my hectic city life. The moment I pulled into the gravel driveway, the overwhelming silence hit me, a welcome contrast to the constant hum of traffic and sirens I'd grown used to. I was ready for fresh air, slow mornings with coffee on the porch, and maybe even fishing if I felt ambitious. The house itself was charming but simple, a modest two-bedroom with a wraparound porch overlooking the lake. Tall pines framed the water's edge, casting soft shadows that danced on the surface as the wind stirred. I imagined myself sitting there for hours, listening to the loons call and watching the occasional family of ducks paddle by. It felt like a dream, the kind you don't expect to come true, especially not on a tight budget. For the first couple of days, I stayed busy unpacking boxes and setting up my space. The neighborhood was quiet, only a few cars passed by each day, and the neighbors I met were friendly but kept to themselves. I figured that was part of the charm, privacy and peace, no busy HOA meetings or noisy kids running around. On the third afternoon, I decided to explore the property a bit more thoroughly. There was a narrow, overgrown path behind the house that led down to the water. I followed it, eager to see the lake up close, and that's when I noticed something strange. A series of docks extended out into the water, neat wooden platforms stretching like fingers across the gentle waves. They were old but sturdy, some with faded paint and a few missing planks here and there. I assumed they must belong to the community, common property shared by all the residents. After all, I'd heard from a neighbor that the HOA took care of shared amenities, like docks and picnic areas. Curious, I stepped onto one of the docks, marveling at how peaceful it was out here. The water was cool and clear beneath my feet, and the distant calls of birds filled the air. I sat down on the edge, dangling my legs over the side, letting the gentle rocking soothe the roughness left from moving day. For a few moments, it felt like the perfect escape from the world. That's when the chaos began. From the corner of my eye, I saw a group of people making their way quickly toward me. At first, I thought maybe neighbors curious about the newcomer, but their faces were serious, almost tense. The leader of the group, a middle-aged man with a sharp gaze and a clipboard in hand, strode up without hesitation. "Excuse me," he said, voice firm. "What are you doing on the docks?" I blinked, caught off guard. "I live just up there," I said, pointing toward my house. I was just exploring the property. I didn't realize this was off limits. His eyes narrowed. "These docks belong to the HOA. Only members are allowed access. Do you have permission to be here?" I hesitated. Permission? No one had mentioned any restrictions when I bought the house. "No, I don't. I thought they were part of the community, shared property." He exchanged a quick look with the others in his group, 3 women and 2 other men, all standing stiffly behind him. "That's not how this works," he said, tone sharp. "If you don't have authority, you need to leave immediately." Suddenly, I felt the weight of the moment. I didn't want trouble, I just wanted to enjoy my new home. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up slowly. "I wasn't aware of any restrictions. I just moved in and wanted to see the lake." The leader's expression softened a little but didn't lose its edge. "You might want to check your deed carefully. There are some ownership details that most people don't know about. You may think these docks are HOA property, but legally, they're not." My heart skipped a beat. Ownership details. I barely glanced at the paperwork beyond the basics. "What do you mean?" He pulled out a document and waved it lightly. "Your house includes rights to a stretch of the lakefront, docks included. It's unusual, but it's how the previous owner set it up. If you control the docks, you control who can use them. The HOA has been using them for years without question, but technically, it's your decision now." I stood there, stunned. The idea that I might own something so important, and that the HOA was basically demanding I surrender control, felt like something out of a legal thriller, not my quiet lakeside move. "I didn't know any of this," I said, almost whispering. "I just moved in. I don't want to cause problems." The leader gave me a long look. "Well, you've caused quite a stir. We need to figure this out, quickly. The docks are essential to the community. This can't turn into a fight." I felt overwhelmed. What had started as a peaceful escape was turning into something complicated and strange. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted peace. Yet here I was, suddenly caught between a community and a lake I barely knew I controlled. As they left, promising to come back with more questions and, to work things out, I sat back down on the dock's edge. The lake was still calm, the sun dipping lower behind the trees, but inside, a storm was brewing. The following morning, I woke up still shaken from the confrontation on the dock. My head buzzed with questions. How had I, a total newcomer, unknowingly stepped into a legal mess? What did it even mean to control docks that the HOA had been treating as theirs for years? I decided that before I let things spiral further, I needed to get a handle on what exactly I owned, and what powers came with it. I started by digging through the mountain of paperwork left by the previous owner, the retired schoolteacher who had sold me the house. Among the typical closing documents and tax forms, I found an old deed tucked away in a folder marked, Property Rights. The language was dense and full of legal jargon, but one thing was clear: the house's title included not only the land it sat on but a specific stretch of the lakefront property, including the docks that jutted out over the water. It was an unusual setup, apparently, but not unheard of in waterfront properties. While the HOA managed shared amenities like the clubhouse and roads, the deed explicitly granted the homeowner, me, control over those docks. That meant I had the right to decide who could use them, when, and how. The HOA's decades-long use of the docks wasn't actually official, it was more of a quiet assumption, a habit they'd never questioned until now. The implications hit me like a thunderclap. I held a power here I hadn't even imagined, a power that could disrupt the delicate balance of this small community. It explained the urgency in the HOA leader's voice, their demand for immediate answers. To them, these docks weren't just planks and pilings, they were a symbol of shared access and control, and suddenly that symbol was under my control. But I was new. I didn't know the neighbors well. I didn't want to be the person who stirred up conflict, especially in a place I'd chosen for peace and solitude. I wondered if this was all just a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a simple conversation, or if it was the start of a drawn-out battle I wasn't prepared for. Before I could formulate a plan, the phone rang. It was the HOA president himself, the man who'd led the group to confront me the day before. His tone was less aggressive than I expected, but still firm. "Look, we need to meet," he said. "There's a lot of history here, and frankly, nobody expected this to come up. The docks have always been a community resource, and now we're all caught off guard. I want to find a way that works for everyone." I appreciated his willingness to talk, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. "I want to understand the situation better," I said cautiously. "I'm new here, and I want to do the right thing. But I also need to protect my rights." He sighed. "Fair enough. Let's meet tomorrow evening at the clubhouse. Bring whatever documents you have. We'll go over everything together. We want to avoid a legal mess if we can." The next day, I arrived at the small, weathered clubhouse with my deed and notes in hand. Inside, the room was packed with HOA board members and a few neighbors, older couples who'd lived here for decades, young families who looked anxious but hopeful, all gathered around a long table. The mood was tense but polite, like everyone knew this was a high-stakes conversation. The HOA president started by outlining the history of the docks, how they'd been built and maintained by the community, how boats were tied up here every summer, how the docks were a focal point for social events and quiet mornings alike. For years, no one had questioned who technically owned the structures. It was simply accepted as common property, a shared benefit. Then it was my turn. I explained that my deed gave me explicit ownership rights over the docks and the surrounding lakefront property, which I'd only just discovered. I confessed that I hadn't intended to disrupt anything and that I hoped to find a fair solution that respected the community's needs as well as my own. Several people nodded in understanding, though a few looked skeptical. One woman, Mrs. Caldwell, who'd lived in the community for over 30 years, spoke up. "This is a big surprise for all of us. We've relied on those docks for years. It's hard to imagine the lake without free access." I empathized deeply. "I get that. And I'm not here to take away what's important to the neighborhood. But I also want to ensure the docks are safe and properly maintained. I'm open to sharing access but on terms that make sense." The discussions went back and forth for hours. They raised concerns about liability, maintenance costs, and access schedules. I suggested creating a formal agreement that allowed the community use of the docks but placed responsibility for upkeep and safety with me. In return, I'd reserve the right to deny access if the docks were being misused or damaged. By the end of the night, a tentative plan had formed. The HOA would acknowledge my ownership but keep communal access rights through a clear, written agreement. They'd also contribute to maintenance costs, and we'd establish guidelines for usage and safety. Everyone left the meeting a little relieved but aware that more detailed negotiations were still ahead. Driving home under a sky full of stars, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. What started as a confusing and intimidating confrontation was slowly turning into a partnership. I still had a lot to learn about this lake, its history, and the people who called it home. But maybe this unexpected power over the docks could become a bridge, not a barrier. For now, the lake was calm again, but I knew the ripples from this storm were just beginning. The night after the HOA meeting, I felt restless. My mind churned with everything we'd discussed, the complicated web of ownership, access, and community expectations. The peaceful lakeside retreat I'd envisioned was suddenly a negotiation table. But I also knew the only way forward was dialogue, not confrontation. So, the next weekend, I decided to invite a few HOA leaders over for a barbecue, something informal, something to remind us all that this was a community, not a courtroom. The evening was warm, the sun dipping low over the horizon, casting long orange streaks across the water. I set up the grill on the porch and arranged a few chairs in a loose circle. One by one, the HOA members arrived, some with cautious smiles, others still a bit wary. But as the burgers sizzled and the smell of grilled vegetables filled the air, the tension in the group began to ease. We started by talking about the lake itself, how it had been the heart of the community for decades. Stories emerged of summer picnics, children learning to swim, quiet mornings spent fishing off those very docks. It was clear everyone loved this place deeply, and that love had created a bond stronger than any legal paper. I never realized how complicated property rights could get, said the HOA president, Mike, between bites. We always just assumed the docks belonged to all of us, but the deed changes everything. I nodded. Yeah, it caught me off guard too. But I'm not interested in taking away the community's access. I want to work with you all to make sure the docks are safe, well-maintained, and respected. There was a pause, then Linda, one of the longtime residents, chimed in. It's just that, we worry about losing something that feels like ours. These docks aren't just wood and nails, they're where memories live. I get that, I said honestly. I want to honor those memories. What if we create a formal usage agreement? It would lay out who can use the docks, when, and how, but keep the spirit of shared enjoyment alive. The conversation grew more collaborative after that. We talked about liability, who would be responsible if someone got hurt, and maintenance. I proposed taking on the responsibility for repairs and safety checks, as part of my ownership rights. In exchange, the HOA agreed to contribute to upkeep costs and help coordinate volunteer efforts for seasonal cleaning and small repairs. As the night went on, barriers started to break down. We shared laughs, old stories, even a few jokes about the new dock boss, who was learning the ropes. It was the first time since I moved in that I felt like I truly belonged here, not just as a homeowner but as part of the community. Over the next few weeks, we worked together to draft a usage agreement that balanced my rights with the community's needs. It wasn't always easy, there were heated moments and tough compromises. But every meeting ended with a sense of progress. The docks would remain a shared space, just with clearer rules and responsibilities. One afternoon, as I stood on the dock watching the sun glisten on the water, a group of kids from the neighborhood ran by, laughing and chasing each other toward the lake. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. The lake wasn't just mine or the HOA's, it belonged to all of us in some way. By the time the agreement was signed and everyone had a copy, the storm that had blown in the week I moved in had passed. The docks were still there, still busy with boats and morning fishermen, still a gathering place for friends and neighbors. But now, there was a new layer of respect and understanding beneath the surface. I learned something important through all this: sometimes power isn't about control or ownership. It's about responsibility, communication, and finding common ground. I came here seeking peace, but what I found was connection. The lake was still calm, but beneath that calm, a stronger community had formed. Looking out over the water one evening, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The HOA hadn't just come storming in to demand something. They'd challenged me to step up and become part of something bigger, and maybe, just maybe, that was the best welcome a new homeowner could hope for.